Let me spend a minute on China. It seems like in the intervening years, China has, to some extent, taken center stage, at least in the cyber area. We could talk about the decades of cyber theft, cyber-propelled disinformation, but just it seems like there's been a little bit of a change. Maybe it's just my impressionistic sense. In the last several months or year or so, it sounds like there's almost a step up in the level of sophistication on the Chinese. We've seen reports about their allegedly hacking into the Japanese classified networks. There was a report of a post on that. It sounds like there's a Chinese attribution to the Microsoft Outlook hacks that apparently led to the emails of our Secretary of Commerce and our ambassador to Beijing being read by adversaries. Even more ominously, we've seen reports about apparent Chinese infiltration into infrastructure in Guam. So my sense is that maybe they've made a big step up in increase in their cyber sophistication. I wanted to ask you if that's your perception or is my layman's perception correct? And there's a lot of heated commentary about the spy balloon, et cetera, and how we need to deal with the Chinese. But let me just put it bluntly, are they ahead of us in cyber and surveillance? Are they equal to us? How do you think about them?
No.
Chinese in this regard?
No.
Okay, all right.
No.
That's clear.
But let me say this, here's the piece, right? I mean, I think this is to your really good lead in here, which is there is a scope, scale, sophistication that we ascribe to what China is doing today. Are they getting better? Yes. But I think the question always comes back to us as we think about this, how do we address it? And what are our competitive advantages against a nation that has so much scope, so much scale, and increasing sophistication? Well, I think it begins with this idea of our competitive advantages are, first of all, being able to understand what our adversaries doing. You mentioned intelligence gathering. You mentioned this idea of, utilizing different capabilities to spy on us. Certainly we have to address this. I am very concerned, and we are addressing the issues that we made public in May of this past spring about China living off the land, this idea of positioning themselves in different critical infrastructure elements of the United States, our allies, our territories, to perhaps utilize in the future. Why are they doing that? Why are they in our critical infrastructure? So that's the thing that we are addressing today.
Can I interrupt? Is your sense that perhaps the Chinese are infiltrating some of our infrastructure networks, not only for surveillance, but in essence for positioning themselves to do future malevolent actions, such as taking down networks, and they want to be in that position if they need to sort of pull the trigger?
So certainly what, Glenn, we have said is that there is an option that provides the Chinese against many different scenarios. And if you're in our critical infrastructure, it's not to collect intelligence, it's our view. And so we want to make sure we're addressing that, we're doing that today. But I think the other piece that we have to think about is, so clearly, if it's not just the ability for us to understand what our adversaries are doing, I think the other piece that is our huge advantage is the private sector. I mean, this is what we've learned from Russia, Ukraine. Being able to leverage the private sector, being able to work with the private sector, being able to understand what the private sector is doing is tremendously important. And the other piece is we have a global set of partnerships. We have a global set of partnerships that allow us a look throughout the world, allows us a series of like-minded nations to be able to address actions such as these. This is something that is truly a competitive advantage for us, and this is what we're utilizing today to address some of the issues that you've just highlighted there.
Let me maybe turn the question around and ask something, not to put you on the spot, but how confident are we, given the technical sophistication of the Chinese hackers, how confident are we that our own classified networks, for which you are the national manager under statute and executive order, you're responsible for the Pentagon's classified networks, defense contractors' classified networks, that's your responsibility. How confident are we that our classified networks have not been infiltrated, they haven't been compromised? And maybe you could even comment on how do we know if that's happened?
So confident and vigilant. And I think that those two are very, very important words. It's not confident that's just we're confident. It's confident we have a vigilance every single day that we're looking and making sure that our classified networks, the networks that are responsible for our most sensitive communications or the operations of our most lethal weapon systems, that they're assured, that there is an integrity there. You spoke about my responsibilities as a national manager under my role as the Director of National Security Agency. I'm also responsible for the DoD Information Network. So both the classified and unclassified networks in my role as Commander U.S. Cyber Command. So an example of what we're doing is how do you work with different combatant commands to keep this vigilance alive? We learned this in Ukraine. Why is it that we're able to share intelligence so effectively with a partner? Because we set the theater, being able to understand that what we're going to share has to be protected. The other piece is that I would come back to this idea of hunt forward operations. It's the fall of 2018, and we have a really intriguing idea bubbling up from the bottom. Folks that are saying, hey, wouldn't it be really interesting if we sent a team at the request of a foreign country to hunt on their networks? At the request of a foreign network. Hey, please come, help us look at what's happening on our networks. If you find malware, if you find, tradecraft, if you find some other areas that you think are concerning, we want to be able to publicize that. One of the first places we go, 2018, Ukraine. Following Ukraine, 4 other times, the 4th time, the 3rd of December, 2021, with a team of about 19 Marines and soldiers, go back to Ukraine to hunt forward operations. And so this is the piece of vigilance that's really important. We don't necessarily believe it because we think it. We believe it because we test it, we exercise it. It's the whole idea of being persistently engaged on our adversaries.
Good, okay, well, let's let me maybe take a step back, but still on China for a second, more broadly than just cyber. Obviously when you took office 5 years ago, while China was very much perceived as a threat, it perhaps didn't have the same level of intensity now, including partly because of the sort of political focus on it these days. Everything from Chairman Gallagher's committee in the House, which is newly created to address the perceived threat of China. But you just pick up any op-ed today, or every think tank conference seems to be very much focused on the pacing threat presented by China, particularly in the area of other technologies, just beyond cyber. How do you think about that? Because obviously both Cyber Command and the agency deal with some of these advanced technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum, et cetera, the threat of potential threats to our encryption, for which you're also responsible, so as you both make and break codes. Can you comment on some of this? Are we thinking about this the right way in terms of China as a threat? How do we need to address this more broadly?
I highlighted 2018 as kind of a big year for, I think, the department in looking at cyber. I think 2021 is the inflection point for our nation in cyber. And I think about it, you mentioned, the beginning of 2021 with solar winds. But remember what 2021 is like for us as a nation. It's solar winds. It's Microsoft Hafnium in March. It's Colonial Pipeline in May. It's JBS and Kaseya by the summer. In 1 year, 9 months really, we have supply chain. We have ransomware. We have zero-day attacks. It was the point in time, I think, at least for myself and for our agency and command, cybersecurity is national security. That's a big year, and I think that from that year forward, we think differently. I think the nation thinks differently. We have a number of different abilities now, I think, that we didn't have before. We have partnerships that have been developed. And so when you say, how do you think about it, I begin with this idea that 2021 sets the foundation for us to go forward. How do we ensure that we bring quantum-resistant encryption to bear for our nation, as is directed by National Security Policy Memorandum 10? How do we think about defending our national security systems differently? How do we work with the private sector? 2021 leads into 2022, and I think, if we talk about Russia-Ukraine, one of the things I will certainly highlight is the fact that we're learning in 2018 and 2021, we have to be engaged with the private sector. The private sector gives us the ability to address, again, the piece that we talked about previously, an adversary's scope, scale, and sophistication. Doing it with a series of partners, with a very, very focused strategy, it pays off.
So could I summarize by saying you don't think the Chinese threat in these areas is being hyped? Do you think it's something we very much need to continue to focus on, or do you think there's some excess hysteria?
China is the pacing challenge of our nation. It is the generational challenge that we will address, our children will address, our grandchildren are going to address. We see it across the major lines of national power, their diplomatic, information, military, economic. It's different than adversaries that I've seen in my 3 decades plus of service in the Army. When I came in, it was the Soviet Union. But I don't remember anyone ever saying, boy, I hope they don't bring the cars from the Soviet Union to sell them in Detroit, right? That wasn't one of the things we were thinking about. we were thinking about a military component. Now we think about many, many different components of national power. And I think, this is, again, where I think our agency has also pivoted, our command has pivoted to think about, how do we provide support to broader issues in competition? How do we empower the elements of national power that our agency has? Maybe it's in commerce or in treasury, but these are all critical elements that we are working towards today.
Yeah, well, I know you've talked before about how the sort of, as partly due to technology, but also geopolitical events and as you said, the pacing threat of China, the aperture of national security has expanded. So NSA, therefore, is focused on a much wider array of threats than before, obviously. So I know you've commented on that too.